All right, folks, we want to get started on time. Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Thank you. Welcome to the Psychology Department's 11th annual program, and we thank you for spending your morning with us. Before we start, we wanted to give a thank you to Dr. David Myers for taking time out of his busy schedule to fly here today to share his knowledge with us. We're very excited to have him. Thank you to the entire Psychology Department for helping us consider our topic this year. Thank you to Professor Kara Williams for all her help in organizing this program and helping us promote it. Also, thank you to Dr. Amy Williamson for helping us set up the CEU table. So if we have any counselors in the room, please check at the table in the front in the lobby and give them your information so you can get your CEU certificate. Also, thank you to Professor Baker for helping us field the questions later with our 2 microphones, and to our Psychology Club students for ushering our audience. A big thank you to Dr. Walter Franzek from the Liberal Arts Department for helping support this entire program and bringing programs like this to our campus every year. And finally, how could we not thank all of you for being here and being part of our audience? You make up the community. Yes, absolutely. You make up the community in the community college. Our program is going to be about an hour and 15 minutes. Dr. Myers is going to present, and then we're going to have time in the end for questions and answers. Professor Baker and I are going to come around with the microphone, so just raise your hand and we'll have you ask the questions for Dr. Myers. So we are very honored to have Dr. David Myers with us today, who's going to shed light on the age-old question: what is the secret to happiness? Is it relationships? Is it love? Is it work? He's going to share that info with us. We reached out to him, and he was so gracious to join us. Dr. Myers is a professor of psychology with a specialty in social psychology at Hope College in Michigan. His scientific writings, supported by National Science Foundation grants and fellowships, have appeared in 36 academic journals, including Science, The American Scientist, The American Psychologist, and Psychological Science. Dr. Myers has authored 17 books, including the textbooks titled Psychology, which is the #1 book in the United States, from what I've heard, Exploring Psychology, and Social Psychology, in addition to general audience books dealing with issues related to the Christian faith, as well as scientific psychology. He has published chapters in over 60 books and is widely recognized for his research on happiness and is a huge supporter of the positive psychological movement. His research and writings have been awarded the Gordon Allport Prize, the Honored Scientist Award from the Federation of Association in the Brain and Behavioral Sciences, the Award for Distinguished Service on behalf of Personality Social Psychology, and he's received 3 honorary doctorate degrees as well. Dr. Myers has also received the 2011 American Academy of Audiology Presidential Award, the Walter T. Ritter Award for the Hearing Loss Association of America, and Oticon's 2013 Hearing Advocacy Award. Finally, in 2013, he was appointed to represent Americans with hearing loss on the Advisory Council of the National Institute of Deafness and Other Communication Disorders. So a very long list of accolades for Dr. Myers. Please join me in welcoming Dr. David Myers.
Thank you so much. It is a great pleasure to be here to say thank you for the privilege of assisting the teaching of psychology at Moraine Community College, to make some new friends, such as I have already this morning, and to invite you to go in pursuit of happiness with me by seeing what psychological science has learned about what does and doesn't predict people's experiences of happiness. Let me give you a little overview of psychological science from its first 120 years or so. If we look in psychological abstracts for certain words, we can find 135,000 articles that contain the word depression, but only about 8,000 on happiness. There's more than 40,000 on fear, only about 2,000 on courage. Some 18,000 on anger, only about 3,000 on joy. We've done a very good job at focusing on human problems and how to alleviate them. But maybe it's time, said Martin Seligman in his presidency of the American Psychological Association, for a more positive psychology. He foresaw 3 pillars under a more positive psychology for the 21st century that complemented our emphasis on pathology. First is what we'll be looking at today, the study and the cultivation of positive, what we call subjective well-being, feelings of happiness, a sense of satisfaction with life, an optimistic outlook. Second pillar underneath this new positive psychology is the study and the cultivation of positive human strengths and virtues, such as creativity, courage, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, and the like. And the third is the study of and the creation of positive social institutions, healthy families, safe neighborhoods, pro-social media, effective schools. Those are the themes of this new positive psychology. And one analysis of the words that appear in the literature of positive psychology showed you some of these words, as well as optimism, strength, creativity, happy, autonomy, happiness, self-efficacy, self-determination, resilience, and so forth. These are all topics within this new sphere that's called positive psychology. If we look at specifically at our topic of today, the scientific pursuit of happiness, we can track the growth and interest in the scientific exploration of happiness across time. Back in the late 1980s, when I first began to be intrigued by this new research on what does and doesn't predict people's experiences of happiness, there were fewer than 100 articles a year appearing. Now, as you can see, there's more than 1,000 articles appearing in the literature each year. Well, if we want to go in pursuit of happiness, we have to study it. What is happiness or subjective well-being? We have different ways of assessing and measuring it. Some are multi-item questionnaires that ask you to reflect on your own emotional experience. Sometimes we interrupt people's experience on smartphones, asking them to record their experience right now using a little app, like how do you feel? Are you feeling negative or positive? On alert or alert and awake. Or sometimes we ask just very simple, straightforward questions. Here's one that's been put to hundreds of thousands of representatively sampled people across the industrialized world. You might answer this for yourself. Taking all things together, how would you say things are these days? Would you say you're very happy, pretty happy, or not too happy? Or we can ask you a slightly different question, a little more cognitive question about your sense of satisfaction with your overall life. How satisfied are you with your life as a whole these days? Are you completely satisfied, fairly satisfied, not very satisfied, or not at all satisfied? Well, if we put simple questions like that to random, that is representative samples of people in different countries, such as the United States, what do they report? How happy are people? If you go to bookstores and pull down, as I did when I got involved in studying the scientific pursuit of happiness, books about happiness, mostly written by mental health workers who spend their days with deeply unhappy people, you will read over and again that few Americans are genuinely happy. A third of Americans wake up depressed each day, and so forth. But if you instead go not to clinical samples, but to representative samples of average Americans, out there, you find their self-reports are mostly pretty positive. 3 in 10 Americans say they're very happy. Most of the rest say they're pretty happy. Only 1 in 10 say they're not very happy. Or look at these reports that were aggregated across 45 nations, surveys of more than 1 million people gathered by my occasional collaborator, Ed Diener at the University of Illinois. And what Dr. Diener did is calibrate these subjective well-being scales to a 0 to 10 continuum. 0 is some version of I'm very unhappy, completely dissatisfied, life is terrible. 5 is neutral, and 10 is I'm very happy, completely satisfied, life is a joy. Where do most human beings fall across the world on this 10-point continuum? They fall to the positive side of neutral. About a 7, if you will, on this 0 to 10 continuum, which Professor Diener says makes some adaptive sense. If you think about it, if most of us walked around depressed all the time, then when something bad happened, it wouldn't have the signal value because we're already feeling bad, whereas if you usually feel at least pretty okay, slightly positive, then if something bad happens, it has signal value. It alerts you to do something about it and deal with it. Or look at this distribution of life satisfaction levels among 75,000 British people on a 1 to 7 scale. And as again, you can see, most people rate themselves as a 5 or a 6 in life satisfaction on that 7-point continuum. Down at the Southern Methodist University, David Watson interrupted 226 students with electronic pagers more than 10,000 times, asking them at the moment they were interrupted to report what kind of a mood they were in. What kind of emotions were they experiencing? And as you can see, about 4.5% of the time, they said they were experiencing some really negative mood. They were angry, they were upset, they were depressed, or whatever. 17% of the time, they were really happy, or they were elated, or they were excited, or whatever. 4 times as often positive as negative. And when Gallup asked Americans which of these faces describes how you feel about your life as a whole, you can see that more than 4 in 5 reported being in a good mood at the moment Gallup interrupted them. The Gallup World Poll asked people across the world, yesterday, did you feel well rested? Did you get treated with respect? Did you smile, laugh? Did you learn to do something or do something that's interesting? Did you experience enjoyment? How was your day yesterday? Well, the people answering yes to all those questions were more than 80% in Paraguay and Venezuela. Here in North America, a little short of 80%. In the world's unhappiest places, Iraq and Syria, it was just short of 50%. Half of people in war-torn Iraq and Syria at the time were saying, yesterday, for them, it was a pretty good day. So, first point, people's self-reports are mostly not depressed. They're mostly reasonably positive, which raises the question, can we trust them? Or are they just in denial of their inner misery, their inner pathology? One famous psychologist once said, most families are dysfunctional, and if you think yours isn't or wasn't, that almost by definition means you're in denial of the pathology in your family's life. Well, we can acknowledge that the happiness thermometer may read everybody a little high. There may be some tendency to shade things in a positive direction when responding to interviewers. And yet, these self-report measures that I've told you about are pretty reliable. People's responses are pretty consistent across time. They're correlated with samplings of people's experience. So if you say you're a very happy person, the chances are, if we aggregate your moment-to-moment mood reports over time, we'll find some consistency between your momentary moods and your overall self-ratings. They're also correlated with other positive indicators. If you say you're a very happy person, the chances are you will be seen smiling and laughing more than people who rate their lives as less happy. And it's also, therefore, correlated with other reports. If you say you're a very happy person, the chances are that your housemates, your friends, your family will probably agree with you. If you say you're deeply unhappy, those who know you will probably agree with those self-reports. Finally, remember that what we're studying here is subjective well-being, for which the final authority, by definition, is the person that lives inside your skin. If you think you're very happy, very satisfied with your life, then you are experiencing, by our definition, positive well-being. And think of it this way. If you were to say, or if someone were to say, I'm deeply unhappy, I'm completely dissatisfied with life, I just had a text of like 20 minutes ago from somebody who was reporting that. Would we doubt their self-reports? Would we say, I don't believe you. I think you're just in denial of your inner joy. Buck up. No, we take people seriously. And that's all these researchers are doing in taking people's self-reports seriously, whether negative or positive. And thus going in pursuit of our big question of the morning. Who is happy? So given that most people say their lives are reasonably happy, but some people are happier than other people, what would I need to know to predict whether you or somebody you care about would be one of those people who describes their life as happy and satisfying? Would it, for example, help me to know your age? Is it true that there are unhappy times of life, Some people suppose it's the teen years, when adolescents are buffeted by mood swings, peer pressure, parental demands, vocational worries. Other people think it's the midlife crisis years. Or others say, no, it's the later life years, when health is fading, income is waning, friends or family have moved away, health challenges are there. The Grim Reaper stares you closer in the face month by month. It's a pretty depressing scenario if you want to paint it that way. And yet here are life satisfaction reports of 170,000 representatively sampled people across 16 nations. And as you can see, the percentage who say they're at least reasonably satisfied with their life, if not very satisfied, is about 80% for every age group. Some are dissatisfied, but most are reasonably satisfied, and age is really no predictor. Although age is a predictor of certain other specific domains of life satisfaction, such as marital satisfaction. Here are 4 studies that look at marital satisfaction across the family life cycle. And if you look here on the left, you can see marital satisfaction pretty high during the honeymoon period, shortly after marriage, before children. And you can see it bottoming out here. I don't know if you can read that. That's teenagers 12 to 16 in the home. Tends to be the low point for marital satisfaction. And then for those marriages that survive to the empty nest turns out for most couples to be a reasonably happy place. So, some interesting age-related trends in the specific domain of satisfaction. But tell me your age. I don't have any idea how happy you are. Although, by the way, as you mature, your moods will become more stable. The ocean of emotion you travel will be less up and down and within short periods of time. Second question, is there a relationship between gender and well-being? Is it true that, as some people suppose, men are happier because of their historically greater incomes and social power? Or, as others believe, are women happier because of their greater capacity for, or so it's said, for intimacy, empathy, and social connection? Again, data from the 170,000 person 16-nation study shows us the percentage of fairly satisfied men and women is identical. And if we raise the bar and ask who's very happy, we see only a very modest difference between men and women. This despite the fact that men and women are at different risk for different forms of pathology. Oh, one other indication of gender similarity. This is the percent who said they smiled or experienced enjoyment and happiness and laughter during a lot of the day yesterday. And as you can see, until late life, the curve for men and women is essentially identical. No gender difference, despite the fact that we are at different risk for psychiatric disorders. So women, for example, compared to men shown here, are at doubled risk for disabling depression or anxiety. Schizophrenia doesn't know much of a gender difference. Men are slightly more vulnerable to schizophrenia than are women. Alcoholism, on the other hand, is alcohol substance use disorder is 4 times more common among men than among women. Antisocial conduct disorder is 8 times more common among men than women. So tell me your gender, and I could make a guess as to whether you're more at risk when there's stress and difficulty in your life to ruminate, to overthink, and to become depressed or anxious, or whether to drink and act out in response to that challenge. Still, those differences aside, I don't really know anything about your happiness just by knowing your gender. So still in pursuit of happiness, I want to know next about income. Is there any sense in which it's true that money buys happiness? Now, if you ask people that bald question, does money buy happiness? Nearly everybody will say, you can't buy happiness. But if you ask a slightly more subtle question, would you be happier if you made more money? You find that about 3 in 4 Americans say they would be happier. They live less stressed lives, they live more comfortably, they vacation more luxuriously and what all. They could drive to work instead of take the Chicago transit system or whatever. And consider these data harvested from some 14 million entering American collegians since 1965 by UCLA in an annual survey, in which they asked them, what are your life goals? What's very important or essential? From the late 1960s to the present, you can see that developing a meaningful philosophy of life plummeted from about 80% to just short of 50% as an important life goal among 19 listed, while being very well off financially flip-flopped with that figure, going from 40% to now just over 80% as of last year's entering collegiate class. That would be this year's sophomore class. That, by the way, was the highest rated life goal among the 19 listed, outranking helping others in difficulty, raising a family, becoming an expert in one's profession, which were other highly ranked goals. And why not? It's the American dream. As the New Yorker magazine gave it to us in a cartoon, the three-step plan for happiness. Get lots of money, exchange that money for goods and services, and sit back and enjoy the good life. Is there any truth to this? Well, social scientists have triangulated on this question by asking three more specific questions. First, are people happier if they lived in rich countries rather than not so rich countries? Are they happier living in Canada than in Nicaragua, let's say, for example? And here are data illustrative of what's been found repeatedly before 2008 from this particular report and since. And what we see here is along the horizontal or x-axis, gross domestic product per person. So that's an index to national wealth. So those are the rich countries on the right. And on the vertical axis, we have people's self-reported life satisfaction. And as you can see, there is some upward slope to the data indicating some positive correlation between national wealth and the well-being, the psychological well-being of the people in those countries. But you can also see that it's not a linear, that is a straight line relationship, it's curvilinear. So when you go from 0 to, $30,000 a year or so, that's a pretty big change. But increases in national wealth above that level in the Scandinavian, Western European, North American countries don't seem to be associated with increased national well-being. We can also look within a country, such as the United States or Canada or Britain or wherever, and ask whether rich people are happier than not so rich people. Are folks who drive to work in a Mercedes today happier than people who take the bus to work? And again, we have massive data that repeatedly finds the same curvilinear phenomenon. Here's world data from the Gallup World Poll showing us overall levels of well-being and life satisfaction as a function of personal income. And as you can see, as people's income increases up to $80,000 or so, their well-being increases. Poverty is not fun and constrains people's control over their lives, but more and more wealth doesn't proportionally increase well-being either. And this has been reconfirmed in brand new data from 1.7 million worldwide Gallup interviewees, identifying what are called the satiation points for income. That is, within each country, what's the point above which further income increases are not associated with further increases in psychological well-being. And as you can see, for some countries, it's about $40,000. For Western countries such as Australia and such, it's about $100,000 or so. So someplace in the upper 5 digits of income is the point above which, beyond which further income increases are not associated with further increases in well-being. By the way, looking at data here from 450,000 people in the United States, we find the same curvilinear relationship when we look at the relationship between annual income of individuals and their positive emotions, the absence of negative emotion, and the likelihood that they live a life that's largely free of stress. Make it to about $50,000 a year, that's a good point to be. Beyond that, the kind of subjective well-being doesn't change that much. By the way, we can also look at people at the other end of the continuum who live lives that are severely challenged by difficult circumstance, not luxury and able-bodied enjoyment, but the opposite. Here's a sample of people who, as you can see, mostly describe their quality of life as satisfactory or good. Who are they? They're ALS patients. in Germany, Lou Gehrig's disease patients. They have one of the worst diseases that can afflict human experience. It's a progressive neurological disorder that usually claims a life at the end. And yet even these people, in the moment, right now, today, mostly are reasonably happy, as are most people who live with significant disabilities, who are in wheelchairs, or in the population that I'm acquainted with, are living with progressive hearing loss, which is a much more mild kind of disability. Or consider these data. Some years ago, University of Michigan asked people in my state of Michigan which of these faces describes their life as a whole. And as you can see, more than 9 in 10 people pick one of these happy faces. Just a very few years ago, some people took this scale down to Nicaragua and gave it to people who made their living by picking trash dumps and living next to the trash dumps of Nicaragua. These are the poorest people on earth who are surviving by picking through garbage. And asked them which of these faces describe their life as a whole. As you can see, they were somewhat less happy than people in the state of Michigan, and yet 2/3 picked some variation on a smiling face. I don't mean to romanticize poverty, and I think I've shown you that poverty is not a happy condition, but it's kind of impressive how resilient the human spirit is to difficult, challenging circumstance. And by the way, maybe that's a point of encouragement or of good news. Some of you are going to be, maybe some of you have already been challenged by some significant life challenge that was a real blow to you, maybe a health challenge or something like that. You may be surprised if this is in your future at your own capacity for adaptation and resilience in the face of challenge. It'll be bad, it may be brutal, it may be depressing, but in the end, you'll usually survive it. Third, does the happiness of a people rise with their affluence? That's the third question we can ask. If economic circumstance rises over time, does our happiness float upward with it, like the rising tide? Well, let's look at data here in the United States. First data I want to show you is the average personal income of Americans across time over the last 60 years. This is in inflation-adjusted dollars. So as you can see, back in the late 1950s, in today's dollars, the average individual American earned about $12,000. Today, it's close to $40,000. That's not household income, because sometimes you have multiple wage earners in a house. Now, I should acknowledge that this kind of averaging over everybody camouflages one other important change, and that is the increase in income inequality. The red line here shows you the percentage of the income share that goes to the top 1%. The other declining line shows the income share that goes to the bottom 50%. So you can see inequality has greatly increased. The rising economic tide has lifted the yachts much higher than the dinghies, if you will. Still, most people have benefited from the economic growth of the last 60 years. And so, for example, in 1960, only 15% of housing units in the United States had air conditioning. That's up around 90% today. The percentage of people who shower daily was only 29% back in 1950, whereas today you probably take it for granted, a daily shower, which was yesterday's luxury. And in so many other ways, we enjoy this beautiful building and campus, this wonderful technology, our smartphones, our Post-it notes. Who want to go back to living a century ago before all the things that bless our lives today? So, with our increased income, our air-conditioned housing units and our technology and what all, are we happier? This is the percentage of Americans who said they were very happy over time. And as you can see, that's essentially flat. We are twice as rich, 2.5 times as rich. We eat out 2.5 times as often. We have twice as many cars per person today as we did 60 years ago. Life is great materially, but we're no happier. And have you ever felt you were going to have a nervous breakdown? That number has actually gone up. We're a little more stressed out than we were back when we had less money. And another curious fact, we can look at the fate of teens from poverty they're at risk for certain forms of pathology, but there are other teens that come from super affluent families. And those teens are at elevated risk for different pathologies, anxiety, depression, substance use, and eating disorders, which have suffered elevated rates. Let's look at another country. I've been looking at the United States. China is another interesting case story. Gallup surveyed the People's Republic of China in 1994 and again in 2004. First, what material things did people have in 1994? Barely over a third had a color television. Only a fourth had a refrigerator. Very few had phones. In 2004, when they went back, those numbers had soared. Just 10 years. And now most people had TV, half had refrigerators, most had phones. I've been privileged to go to China 3 different times, and some of the people who I've gone with who've come there repeatedly are just amazed at the economic growth in China. Up in Michigan, a manufacturing state, we sometimes lament the outsourcing of labor to China, which has meant less factory work here in the United States. But hey, it's good news for people in China, and they're people too, and they've enjoyed great material growth. So are they happier? How satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the way things are going in your life today? Gallup asked people in China back in 1994. And as you can see, in that impoverished time, half said they were satisfied. Only 12% said they were dissatisfied. Now, in the ensuing periods, Gallup forced a choice between one of those two, and so both of these bars are going to rise. But the striking thing here is that over time, as material abundance was increasing, remember, people have refrigerators and phones here and TVs here, but not here, and yet they're more dissatisfied. And that seems partly due to the fact that in China as well as in the United States, income inequality was increasing during that period. Back in 1994, you had very little. Your life was impoverished, but so was everybody else's around you. And so when you made what we call social comparison between your life and those of others with whom you compared your life, theirs was the same. Now you can compare to others around you. You've got more, but you can see others that have even more and feel relative deprivation by the contrast. So to summarize what I've been saying here these last 8 minutes or so, there does seem to be, in fact, some correlation between wealth and well-being, but it's not nearly as great as what people suppose, and the difference between those two curves is called the affective forecasting error. We adapt to changing circumstance. By the way, this research is making it into the public consciousness, and thus we have New Yorker cartoonists saying, money won't make you happy, Waldron, so instead of a raise, I'm giving a Prozac. And we have the sustainability movement, which is picking up on this by urging us to redefine what progress means from material advancement that's unsustainable and thinking of growth and progress rather in terms more psychological, defined by quality of life and well-being, and that can be lived sustainably in an era of climate change. Okay, we've been searching for happiness. So far we've found that most people are reasonably happy. We have some good ways of measuring happiness and life satisfaction. Some people aren't. We're searching for the difference between those who are and aren't, and we found that, gender, age, money, give us some little clues, but they're pretty little, and so we're still kind of searching for this guy on the right who says, I've always been happy, but lately I've turned it up a notch or two. I mean, these are the kind of super happy people that need what the Onion has proposed as a drug for the annoyingly cheerful, Despondex, if you're annoyingly happy and need to be brought down. Who are these happy people who walk around with smiles on their face? First of all, we do know some things about them. If age and gender and money to a limited extent predicts their happiness, here are 3 things that predicts their happiness much more, and maybe predicts yours as well. First, some traits. Number 1, self-esteem. Happy people like themselves. By the way, self-esteem is typically measured by paper and pencil questionnaires that ask people to respond, true or false to, I am fun to be with, or just a series of statements such as that. And it turns out that most people respond positively. Indeed, most people exhibit what we call a self-serving bias. They tend to perceive and present themselves favorably. More than 90% of drivers think they're better than the average driver, for example. That's self-serving bias, because it can't be true by definition. By the way, self-esteem scores, which do predict happiness scores, tend to be about the same among men and women, people of different races, and that helps us understand why these different demographic groups tend to have similar overall happiness and life satisfaction. Secondly, a sense of personal control, or what we call an internal locus of control. Do you feel in control of your life? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel like the choices you're making today are affecting your destiny? Or do you think that your life is beyond your control? You're a billiard ball controlled by things beyond your control. People who feel a sense of control and empowerment report more happiness for their lives. I come from a place called Hope College, so maybe it's also appropriate that I acknowledge the positive power of optimism. People who are pessimists, who always kind of look on the downside, have low expectations for the future, blame themselves when things don't go wrong, when things don't go right, live with less happiness than people who have a more optimistic outlook, who, when things go badly, can externalize the responsibility for that and think it's not going to affect their future. And finally, extroversion. Happy people tend to be outgoing rather than introverted. That's illustrated, by the way, in these data from Purdue University showing the day-to-day well-being of introverted and extroverted university students. And as you can see, extroverts tend to report more happiness than introverts. Also, Thursday, Friday, Saturday tend to be the happiest days of the week. Now, a lot of you guys seem in a pretty good mood today for a Tuesday, because this is one of the lower days of the week. By the way, there are other data that also give us data. This is kind of a side tangent, but some interesting big data from that was harvested for me by a Facebook social psychologist from billions and billions. He wouldn't tell me the exact number, but I somehow got the sense it was over 20 billion Facebook status updates from people's news feeds. And what they did is analyze those news feeds to see the occurrence of various positive or negative emotion words and what fraction, what proportion they were in according to day of the week. And as you can see, Friday tends to be the happiest day of the week as reflected by the words people are using in their Facebook posts. People have done the same thing with 509 million Twitter messages. And as you can see again, Friday and the weekend days tend to be a little happier in terms of the positivity of the words that people are using in their Twitter messages, and evening tends to be a little happier than this time of the day. So let me just pause there. I realize that at this point, some people may be wondering, is he getting paid for this? I mean, come on. Did you really have to do research to know that, what has he just said, that optimistic, high self-esteem, outgoing people who feel in control of their lives would be happier than their opposites? I mean, my grandmother could have told you that. And so I hasten to remind you, as a little kind of timeout, word from my sponsor, which is psychological science, of what we know as the hindsight bias, or the I knew it all along phenomenon. It's the tendency, once you know the outcome of a study, or a sporting event, or a presidential election, or whatever, to think that that outcome is obvious and would have been predictable in advance. So let's look at these findings, and because what you have to do is imagine an opposite result. Had it turned out that introverts were happier than extroverts, might we not say, well, duh, of course. I mean, think about it. Extroverts are more often engaged with and thus in conflict with and stressed out by other people, whereas introverts, oh, you lucky introverts, you enjoy the serenity and the peace, the deep shalom of your contemplative silence. Or what about optimists and pessimists? My wife sees me as an incorrigible optimist who goes at life with inflated expectations, always expecting the best, and thus am frequently let down when reality doesn't live up to my lofty expectations. Whereas she, a pessimist, or she would call it a realist, has very low expectations as she approaches anything in life, and thus is often surprised and overjoyed at the outcome. And that's the deep joy of pessimism. So it might have worked out that way, and we could rationalize it if it did, but anyway, this is what we found. Okay, now back to our story from that little commercial break. So we've identified some traits that mark happy lives. Two other things that are really interesting. One is what we call social support. Human beings have a need to belong. We are creatures who are evolved and created to be in relationship with other people. And thus people thrive when supported by a network of close, caring relationships. We're not meant to live solo. And we see the results of this, first of all, in health research, what are called epidemiological studies that track lives through time to study health and premature death. People who have close, supportive relationships are at less risk for ill health and premature death. And they also tend to enjoy greater happiness. Do you have any close, intimate friends, people that if something bad or good entered your life today, you could call up and share that with, and they with you? Or do you live, even though you know a lot of people superficially, pretty much alone? One example, and I don't mean to present this as a prerequisite, but simply an example of a close relationship for many people at some point in their adult lives is marriage. So is there any correlation between marital status and psychological well-being? Here are data harvested right out of the city of Chicago, out of the University of Chicago's National Opinion Research Center, which does a sort of social census of America every 2 years now. One of the questions they ask is that happiness question that I asked you at the beginning. Taking all things together, how would you say things are these days? Are you very happy, pretty happy, or not? This is the percentage of very happy people in the United States over time who are married, that's about 40%, or who have never been married. And that number is even somewhat lower among the divorced and separated. That's a big correlation, which is accounted for in most social scientists' minds, because it's only a correlation, it's not necessarily a cause-effect relationship, by, yes, in effective functioning marriage satisfying the human need to belong and to connect and to find social support and intimacy. But also because people who are happy are somewhat more likely to marry and stay married than are people who are unhappy. By the way, if you do happen to enter into a marriage or do have a marriage, how that marriage is going has a way of coloring your emotional life as a whole. So the people that say their marriage is a very happy one, 6 in 10 say life as a whole is very happy. But if your marriage is not very happy, not too happy, the chances are less than 1 in 10 that you find life as a whole to be very happy. Those are the traits of happy people. Those are some of the close relationships that mark happy lives. Last thing I thought I would share with you is just some interesting data relating religious engagement to human well-being. By the way, we have a couple contrasting hypotheses here. Sigmund Freud saw religion as a sickness, what he called an obsessional neurosis that leads people to live sexually repressed, uptight, unhappy lives. And then we have, on the other hand, those who say the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, shalom. I mean, it's great. So who's right? I'm going to show you some data that illustrate, give us an answer to this question, but also illustrate another important principle that I bet you're not aware of, because I wasn't until about 6 years or so ago when I started exploring these data. And that is that we can reach very different conclusions depending on whether we compare entities at the aggregate level, like comparing people in different countries or states, versus comparing individuals within an aggregate. Now that was pretty abstract, but I'm going to make this more specific. What I'm about to show you, I'm going to show you what I'm going to show you, then I'm going to show you some actual data, is that, first of all, we can compare the religiosity of different countries and states in terms of, for example, worship attendance rates in Sweden versus Guatemala, okay? We know those, we have those data. Or within the United States, in Alabama versus Vermont, okay? And it turns out that the more religious people are in a country or a state, Egypt would be a highly religious country, for example. Mississippi would be a highly religious state. The worse off life is, okay? So irreligious countries and states have higher levels of well-being by a lot of measures. And yet, paradoxically, and I call this the religious engagement paradox, when we ask the same question across individuals, we find that highly religious individuals, those who are religiously engaged, part of a faith community, active in it, are at less risk for all kinds of bad things and are more likely to experience happiness and health and what all. Okay? That's paradox. That's weird. But let me show you. First of all, let's look across countries. I harvested these data from the Gallup World Poll, which asked this very simple question, which I could ask you to answer in your own mind right now. Yes or no, is religion important in your daily life? Across the world, what percentage of human beings do you think answered yes? Turns out the answer is 2 and 3. 68% of human beings on the planet Earth answer yes to that question. Gallup in the World Poll also asked a different question, which is called it's called the ladder question, but what it is asking people to reflect on their life as a whole. Imagine a 10-step ladder where 0 at the bottom is the worst life you can imagine, and 10, the top rung of this ladder, is the best life you can imagine. On what rung of that 10-rung ladder is your life today? Okay? Those two questions have been put to enormous samples of people in more than 150 countries across the world. And here's the result. First of all, the answers range from the happiest place on earth when this question was put, Denmark, where the average person ranked their life at an 8 on that 10-rung ladder, to at the lowest place on earth, Togo in West Africa, where the average citizen put their life at about a 3 on that 10-rung ladder. In Denmark, as you can see, 20% of people say religion is important in their daily life, as do 80% in miserable Togo. By the way, the United States is right at the world average in religiosity. This is an average religious country, but we're above the norm in terms of quality of life. What you're looking at, each of those blue dots is a country, by the way, is a minus 0.52 negative correlation between the religiosity of the country and the psychological well-being of the people. Now let's ask the same question across individuals within a country, such as the United States. The National Opinion Research Center here at the University of Chicago, as I've told, has asked 58,000 Americans whether they're very happy, pretty happy, or not very happy. And they've asked those same 58,000 Americans how often they worship, from never to several times weekly. And as you can see, the relationship between those two things is positive. Those who never attend religious services, 26% over the last 40 years or so have said they're very happy, as have 47% of Americans who are religiously engaged more than once a week. Okay, so what have we shown? This is weird, isn't it? Irreligious countries and very religious individuals are happy. Okay, let's try it again. Let's try it with crime rate. Again, we have now I'm going to look at state by state. We have religious attendance rates for each of the 50 states. We know what it is in Alabama and Oregon and Mississippi, and we know what the crime rate is in each state. And it turns out that there's a positive correlation between how often people are religiously engaged and the crime rate. So there's higher crime rates in more religious states. Now, by the way, there's lots of things we're not controlling here, and this is for discussion afterwards maybe. But when we look across individuals at who's been arrested, we see that the arrest rate is dramatically less among individuals who are religiously active than among those who are religiously inactive. So what have we shown here? Irreligious states and highly religious individuals have low crime rates. That's weird, isn't it? But to a social scientist, this is just like, cool. Let's try it with life expectancy. Again, we can see that highly religious states tend to have low life expectancy. By the way, those are also states that tend to have high smoking rates. They're states of the South that are the tobacco growing states and so forth. So there's a lot of things we haven't controlled here. And yet, when we look across individuals in the United States, we see that life expectancy at age 20 in the National Health Interview Survey done by the government is dramatically higher amongst actively religious people than among irreligious people. So what have we said? Irreligious states and highly religious individuals have longer life expectancy. I could show you other data on other dimensions, and they pretty much all fit this same weird pattern. Angus Deaton, Princeton economist who recently won the Nobel Prize, has written with Princeton psychologist Arthur Stone, and they stumbled across this same weird paradoxical set of findings and asked, hold it, why might there be this sharp contradiction between religious people, that is religious individuals, being happy and healthy, and religious places being anything but? Well, one thing that we haven't done is control for other variables. And when you compare highly religious and less religious countries and states, you're comparing other things that are confounded, that go along with that religious difference. Because, for example, those highly religious states and countries tend to be high-income countries in which people are more psychologically self-sufficient and less religious. If you control for objective life circumstance like income, it totally eliminates the negative correlation between income and well-being and health across those places. If anything, it flips to a slight positive correlation between the religiosity of a place, a country or state, and the well-being of the people in that place. By the way, there's other domains as well where we can find this paradoxical phenomenon. Let me ask just a question before I show these data. Who's more likely to vote for the Republican candidate in presidential elections? Rich people or poor people? You thought it was rich people, but here are the data state by state. The high-income states shown on the right, these blue dots represent the 50, there's 50 blue dots here representing the 50 states. The richer a state, the more Democratic it votes. Okay? Rich states vote Democratic, poor states like Alabama and Mississippi vote Republican. So there you have it. Rich people are for Democrats, poor people are for Republicans. Oh, you say, but look at the individuals. And yes, you're right. When we look at individuals, we get exactly the opposite pattern. High-income individuals are more likely to vote Republican and vote for tax cuts in their interests, if you will. Low-income individuals are more likely to vote Democrat. So what do we find? We have a similar paradox when we look at wealth and politics. Poor states and rich individuals vote Republican. So little lesson for today is you can sometimes make whatever point you want to make. For example, if you want to make religion look good or bad, it depends on how you pick the data. Whether you use aggregate data comparing countries or states, or whether you use individual data comparing individuals. And you can ask yourself, for wealth and politics, for example, which data tell the more important story? You know, you could decide that as well as I tend to think it's the individual data. That's where life is lived. But anyway, it's just really, really curious data. And when I step back and ask the question, for individuals, why is religious engagement associated with greater happiness and better health? Different answers emerge, like maybe it's social support. There are 350,000 faith communities in the United States and Canada, each of which is a caring support network for its active members. Or maybe it's a mandate to exert self-control and self-regulation over your impulses. Michael McCullough and a colleague in one of our leading psychological periodicals noted that religious engagement across individuals is associated with a lot of positive things: lower crime rates, teen sexuality, and pregnancy, longer life, higher marital satisfaction, and it turns out each of those things is also associated with greater self-control, with self-regulation. Can you regulate your impulses? Can you delay gratification for greater long-term rewards in your life? Well, it turns out that people who are highly religious score higher on measures of impulse control and self-regulation, which helps explain, McCullough says, those positive correlations. Then there's the whole question of meaning and purpose in life. People that have a sense of meaning and purpose to their lives, and we have questionnaires that measure such, live with greater joy and well-being, and some find that guided by their religious faith. Maybe it's a matter of acceptance, feeling accepted by what's ultimate. Maybe it's a matter of not focusing on oneself, but beyond oneself. People who are intensely depressed tend to be intensely self-focused. If there's something in your life that draws you to think, draws you outside of yourself, to focus on some mission, some cause, or other people, something greater than yourself, you're going to live with greater joy. And finally, terror management researchers today who study the emotional effects of confronting your own mortality, your own inevitable death, tell us that religion helps people cope with that terror of their own reality. If you believe that in the end, the very end, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well, maybe you can endure the stresses and the threats, even of your own mortality as well as of daily life, in a more peaceful way. So out of this research comes some concluding wisdom about how we can make our own lives better, how we can flourish. First of all, we need to recognize that we are constrained by our own genetics. Some of those traits that predict happiness are genetically influenced traits. And yet, just as cholesterol level, for example, is genetically influenced, but is also subject to some control by means of diet and exercise, so also our genetically influenced happiness is subject to some influence by some of the things talked about here. By seeking work and leisure that optimally engages our skills, by prioritizing those close relationships that are so important for well-being, by keeping a gratitude journal that enables us to count our blessings. Or I've highlighted just two here. One is aerobic exercise, which turns out to be about as powerful an antidote to mild depression and anxiety as are psychoactive drugs. And secondly, sleep. Most young Americans are living sleep deprived and live with greater alertness, energy, and joy if they can discipline their time to give their bodies the sleep their bodies want and not have to cut that short with an alarm. Those are some of the things we can do to tweak our own happiness. Some more information about that ability to contact me if you're interested is at my website, which is just myname.org, and I have a little blog where I weekly reflect on interesting things in psychological science, some of which I've been privileged to report to here just now at Moraine. Thank you very much for being a terrific audience. We do have some time left now to take some comments or questions.
So folks, we'd like to again thank Dr. David Myers for joining us today. We're going to open it up for question and answers. If you do have a question, raise your hand. Mitch Baker and I, Professor Baker and I will come around, and then you can ask Dr. Myers any questions that you'd like. So who'd like to ask a question? Anybody have a question? I'm coming back. So think about what you might want to ask, and we'll get to you next. Speak nice and loud.
Hi, Mr. Myers. I have a question about what your take is on if religion is a good thing for happiness or if it's something that affects society in a bad way.
Sure. So I think to the extent that a religious community engages some of the things that we've talked about, provides a sense of community and social support, enriches life with a sense of meaning and purpose, gives one a sense of hope when confronting challenges and even the ultimate threat of one's own mortality. To the extent that or anything contributes to those positive things, then it's likely to have positive consequences for people's health and well-being. And that's what we saw in the data when we compared religious engagement across individuals to people's self-reported self-reported happiness and to their health and life expectancy. By the way, you could say, well, religion is really then, psychologically speaking, nothing but those other variables. It's really a social support factor, or it's a meaning factor or whatever. And if we control for all those things, then what would really be the effect of religion and religious engagement per se? That's a little like asking, or it's a little bit like saying, well, what is a hurricane really? It's, if you control for the wind, the driving rain, the storm surge, and so forth, what would be the residual effect of the hurricane after you control for all those things? It would be zero. But that's because a hurricane is a package variable. It's all those things. And likewise, religion is a package variable to a social scientist. Now, there's a completely different question, and that is, for any religious view, whether you want to see it as true or false, as worthy of your life commitment or not. But that's not a psychological question. That's a different question. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. Any other questions over on this side? No? Great. We have one over here.
And by the way, you're welcome to ask just about anything related to psychology too. Go ahead.
I have a question about happiness. So do you feel that it's more social? Like, do you think that happiness has to do with the social aspect or universal aspect, or does it really have to do with, yeah, that's basically my question. Do you feel that happiness really has to do with?
So I would say that the social aspect is absolutely huge. And if you ask me, if you put me against the wall and put a gun to my head and said, tell me, what's one thing that's most important as a determinant of people's happiness, in addition to having genetically endowed traits that may predispose them to be happy, I'd say it's close relationships. It's having supportive, close relationships that are meaningful and that support you. That's when we compare people with lots of close friends to no friends, when we compare married people to separated people, we compare people in happy marriages to unhappy marriages, we see the huge effect of close supportive relationships. The human need to belong is huge. So yes. Thank you.
We have another question over here.
By the way, I love the PA system in this room.
Do you think changing the stigma around mental health would change the way people answered some of those questions?
Would changing our
stigma.
definition of mental health or our system
Just
of...
the stigma of mental
Oh,
health.
stigma of mental health. So would people be more willing to admit to depression today, for example, if the stigma of mental health were somewhat less, and of mental illness or of difficulty? And I think it is somewhat less. And so students today seem to be somewhat more willing to visit their counseling centers on their campuses and to acknowledge their own mental health issues, their anxieties, their sleep difficulties, their depression, and so forth. And so I think, yes. And by the way, teens are admitting to or acknowledging more depression today, and they're also showing higher suicide rates. My co-author on the social psychology text that's used here, Jean Twenge, has a new book out that looks at the growth in social media and the spread of smartphones and tracks rates of teen depression and suicide, and it's just amazing how closely associated those two trends are over time. But of course, what these questions are asking in these surveys is not about depression, it's asking about, are you happy, are you satisfied with your life? But the other side of the coin is, I'm very unhappy, but you could say I'm pretty happy, and you're not saying very happy, there's something short there.
We have a question over here.
Now, you talked about social support when it comes to happiness, right?
Right.
But I think a problem with our generation today when it comes to happiness and social support is that we tend to outsource our happiness on other people or situational factors. Now, those are two opposites. Outsourcing your happiness can cause unhappiness.
Okay, and how would you outsource? Could you give us an example of what you have in mind there?
When you, let's say you're in a relationship and you're in a pretty good relationship, you break up with someone, for example, or it can be family, it can be friend, right? And you depend on people.
Right.
Like you seek that social support, but you end up maybe depending on people. I think that's a common problem with our
Right.
generation today. How would you respond to that?
So, yeah, I mean, it's, in a sense, happiness we need to find within ourselves, but we all are dependent on others for our own happiness, because those relationships really matter. They're really, really, really important, and that's why investing in relationships and making time, making space in our lives for those relationships is a really important thing to do. So, and then the question comes back to the social media generation, is having relationships on social media equal to face-to-face relationships, and to what extent are social media cultivating increased or decreased happiness? That's a huge question that's being researched, and my friend and colleague Jean Twenge is deeply interested in that question.
Dr. Myers, we have a question over here.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you, do you think then it's superfluous or maybe a waste of time to pursue higher levels of economic or social hierarchy if levels of happiness are just stagnant anyway? So I guess to achieve greatness or exceptionalism, do you think it's still
Right.
important to do
That's
that?
that's a very perceptive question, because we humans have not only a capacity for resilience, as I mentioned earlier, when bad things happen, but also a tendency to adapt to changing circumstance. So if we strive for a higher level of anything, of economic attainment, of popularity, or whatever, when we step to that next higher level, it's going to feel good for a time, but then over time, people tend to adapt to that level. There have even been studies of people who've won lotteries, for example, and who've become instantly super wealthy. Immediately, they're joyful. Does that joy sustain itself over time? Well, not really, because people tend to adapt to that new level of attainment, and now it takes variations around that new level to which you've adapted it yourself. So if you're a super wealthy person, to drop down to just being having a $100,000 a year income, you'd feel relatively poor. Having said that, I do want to go back to the data I showed you, showing you that to move from poverty to middle-class life does count for something. That's striving. It accomplishes something. And what does it accomplish? It's not just material things in your life. Now you have a bigger flat-screen TV than you did before, and you can ski in Aspen in Colorado rather than the hills of northern Illinois or whatever in the winter. But it also gives you certain increased control over how you spend your time in your life. And it's that self-control that comes with a middle class as opposed to a lower level of income that may help explain the correlation between achievement and well-being. So, and the other thing is, because we tend to adapt to changing circumstance, we achieve a new level, and then we need a higher high to kind of feel happy again, to kind of feel excited again. That's actually a good thing, because it drives people onward and upward to higher and higher achievement, rather than just to kind of become static at a certain level, at a certain plateau, and be self-satisfied at that level. So it's not a bad thing, this adaptation level phenomenon, as we call it. So, by the way, just in summary, our happiness is substantially determined by two things. One, how we compare ourselves with others around us, that's sort of horizontal. And the other, how we compare ourselves to our recent experience. And if we've moved up recently, then we tend to be happier than if we've moved down. That's adaptation.
Thank you, Dr.
Social
Myers.
comparison and adaptation.
We also have a question from one of our counselors and faculty over here.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi, Dr. Myers. I really enjoy your
Thank
talk
you.
today. I've used your
Thank you.
textbook
Thank you
several
for
times.
welcoming me.
With those Gallup polls, and I think about Togo, for example, and I think about Western culture tends to, with questions like, are you happy, or tell me about yourself, tends to, we'll self-report and sometimes over-self-report and talk about our accomplishments. But then I think about Eastern cultures and different cultures who may answer those questions differently or don't report as much. So I'm wondering, did those polls control, and did those polls figure out how to ask those questions in the appropriate cultural context? Because then that's how I'm looking at that data and wondering about that. Do you understand my question?
Yes. So, I mean, this is a really good question. And it's one that confronts cross-cultural researchers who are doing research across different languages. So I asked you a question, taking all things together, how would you say things are these days? Are you very happy? That was an English language question. So when that question is put in Chinese to people in the People's Republic, is it the same question? Do all those words have the same connotation? How can we be sure of that? One thing cross-cultural researchers do is they translate their questions out to the other language by a translator, and then they have another translator back-translate them back to English. And then they see whether they get back in English the same question that they sent out. And if they do, then they're relatively confident that the meaning has transferred to the new language. So that's a strategy that's used to check to make sure the connotations and all change. Now, there's another aspect, and that is that some cultures, I mean, like America is sort of a prototypical internal locus of control, extroverted, let's all be happy culture. And other cultures, Middle Eastern cultures or Asian cultures, may not prioritize happiness and positive expression so much. So that could be a cultural difference that would affect happiness in the different cultures, or at least the expression of happiness. So, excellent question.
We have time for about 3 quick questions, and then we're going to end our program just so everybody can get to their classes, and then Dr. Myers is on his own schedule. So we're going to take one quick one here.
Are there any differences, if you have seen, in like communities like the LGBT community or like Black communities, any like differences in happiness right there?
Yeah, in fact, if you go to go to talkpsych.com, you'll see that I think maybe it was my most recent blog post is on exactly that question. And I asked the question, I put it this way, in the last 25 years, there's been dramatically increased acceptance of gay and lesbian people and gay and lesbian relationships in the United States. So 25 years ago, 2 out of 3 people opposed and were totally against gay partnerships, gay marriages, for example. And today, nearly that many are in favor. So it's become what is it like to be a gay teen today in the United States? Is it just like being a straight teen? And what I discovered, I stumbled across, is some data in that UCLA survey, that national survey of people entering college. So it's like a couple 100,000 people representatively sampled. And I was just astounded by the rates of self-reported depression within the last year among gay teens is still dramatically higher than it is among straight teens in the United States. So most are doing fine, so I don't want to overemphasize this, but the emotional challenges in a time when still a lot of people are harassing or families not accepting or whatever, same-sex orientation is still a challenge, an emotional challenge for a lot of people. So now that's data focused on kind of late adolescence, so it's not looking at 30-year-olds, but yeah.
One more question over here.
Do you think that a troubling past, troubling childhood might distort or ruin our perception of happiness?
Past troubling times, are you talking about like war, depression, or
Like troubling
political turmoil, or?
personal trauma, especially
Oh,
in
personal
childhood.
trauma.
Yeah, during developmental stages. Do you think
Oh,
that,
I see. Or like child abuse?
Yeah. Do you think that affects how we perceive happiness and how we take it in, and even just give it to someone else, or you know?
Right, okay, now first of all, so if you have some severe challenges in your upbringing, maybe abuse and neglect, does that predispose you to be unhappier? Or when you survive that and get beyond it into a healthier place, do you compare to your horrible earlier life and feel happier than other people who don't have that negative comparison from their past? So, I'm just thinking it could go either way. Now, we do know that severe child abuse and neglect, such as experienced by those children in Romanian orphanages some years ago under Ceausescu, that can have lifelong consequences. But short of severe challenges, the normal range of parenting differences that people experience don't greatly predict their future well-being. Now, of course, people who've experienced horrible things in the past are somewhat more vulnerable to experience horrible things in the future, too, for whatever reason. There's multiple possible explanations of that. So I haven't given a clear, simple answer to your question, except to affirm the question that I recognize.
Dr. Myers, it is 12:15.
12:15.
We are going to
bewitching
conclude
hour.
our program.
Thank
If
you for
anybody has
hanging around.
questions,
Thank you.